This is a workshop about interviewing. And to give you a little bit of background about me, I'm the hiring manager referenced in the title. So I went to the University of New Hampshire, and before my senior year, I got my first internship at Heinemann Publishers, and I helped on the production side of things, helping with copy editing, permissioning, and things like that. And that really got me interested in publishing. And it led a career of 25 years in publishing. 10 of those were in management. And just a couple of years ago, I came to Clark. I really was looking for something different. I'd been in publishing a long time. I had kind of learned everything that I wanted to. It was all getting very technical, and I wasn't as interested in that side of things. I really liked the human aspect. So I decided to channel my interest into higher ed. So that's what brought me to Clark. And I originally started here in the School of Management in the career group, and then moved over to the undergraduate side in the Career Connections Center. And just a quick reminder to everybody that we are actually 5 offices in one. On-campus student employment, which I had as part of that, employer engagement, opportunity funding, career development, and Clark Connect. What you'll learn here is how to prepare for an interview. I'll go over in-person interviews and virtual interviews. I'll talk about what behavioral interview questions are, how to prepare for them, different types of interviews, what to expect, do's and don'ts, and how to follow up after an interview. So again, I had 10 years of management experience, and I did a lot of interviewing because we often hired students right out of college. So I have a little poll that's anonymous. So which of the following interview examples is true? And you can choose more than one. Let me know what you think is true for all of these stories about what not to do. It looks like it's between the candidate showing up 30 minutes late and the one who was wearing what looked like a shirt pulled out of a hamper. So the only one that's false is the candidate showing up 30 minutes late. Seems crazy, but it's true. So all the other ones are true. So a candidate admitted they stopped speaking to a coworker in an interview. Someone showed up wearing what looked like a shirt pulled out of the hamper. It was really gross, to be completely honest. And another candidate admitted that they stayed at their current job so they could plan their wedding. And I was not the hiring manager. I was helping a friend of mine, a colleague of mine, and they hired this person anyway. Let's see. So these are the results. And the winner was actually the false one. So a little fun fact for you. So when you land an interview, it's very important to research the organization, learn what's on their website, find out who is on the interview team, and research as much as you can the people on the interview team. Simple Google search, LinkedIn will tell you different things about them, hopefully. I had learned that someone on the hiring committee at Clark had actually gone to a conference in Washington, D.C., so I kind of weaved that into the conversation during the interview. You can also look at what current events or trends that are impacting the organization. Again, simple Google search, looking on the website, looking on their social media. It's really important to do your research because it shows when you do, and it can impress the people on the other side. Hopefully, too, you can find out what is their role, how would they advance in the organization, that sort of thing. Another thing to do to prepare is to become familiar with behavioral questions. And these questions are designed to really get at who you are as a colleague, as a worker. So often they'll begin with, tell me about a time. And they typically won't be guiding, tell me about a problem and how you solved it. Tell me about a problem that you encountered. And what they're really hoping for is that you'll talk about how you solved it. So these types of questions will help tell the story of who you are. And it's okay to admit that you've made mistakes at work. as long as you talk about reflecting on those mistakes or a different way you could have handled something, that tells your potential employer that your reflection, you're a reflecting kind of person, you learn from your mistakes and you move on. Specific tips for interviewing for remote roles, in this current climate, they're going to ask you questions that really get at your reliability, how you are at communicating, whether you can work independently, because all of those types of things are particularly important in a remote environment. They're always important, but I think they're even more important now because you can't easily walk down the hall in a lot of organizations to talk to people. So think about those things as you prepare to, what stories can you tell that will help tell good stories about these types of traits. And you might think about STAR stories that you have, and STAR stands for situation or task, action, and result. So these stories will tell what you've done in your work environment as proof of what you can do in the future. So for instance, when I was working in publishing years ago, I noticed that at our company, a lot of different project managers were commissioning art for different academic textbooks. And what I found was each project manager was hiring someone to, for instance, draw a heart and draw the circulatory system. So we were paying for all these one-offs, and I proposed to the company that we commission an illustrator to draw one anatomy figure with lots of different layers about the circulatory system, endocrine system, the nervous system, so that we kind of had a library of all of these images instead of paying for each one every single time. So I identified the situation that we were spending too much money on repetitive art. I proposed that we hire an illustrator. I had an idea of how to talk to different acquisitions editors about giving us money for this budget, because it was a lot of money, but in the end we saved a lot of money because we didn't have to keep redrawing art. So hopefully that makes sense. I hope I didn't get too much into the industry, but think about your STAR stories. Think about what work scenarios you can tell of where you identified a problem and had a result. And what I recommend is to keep a running file on your computer. So when I was interviewing for Clark, and I interviewed at a few different places, what I did was I kept a running Word document of all different types of interview questions. And what I did was I typed my answers in there, and then I'd wait a couple days and I'd let them sit so that I had kind of a library. I would go back and look at the stories and think, is this a good story to tell? And so I came up with a lot of different STAR stories to tell, and don't memorize the answers to the questions. The idea is to practice telling them so that you're more comfortable and so that hopefully you're a little bit less nervous when you go for an interview. So resources we have: review interview guides on Vault and or videos on LinkedIn Learning. Hopefully all of you know, but in case you don't, on Handshake, in the resources section, you can look at Vault, and that is a specific access link to get you more resources than the average user could without a membership. So Vault, if you go to career advice and then interview tips and questions, they have lots of articles, lots of really brief videos about how to nail certain interview questions, things like that. So you can look there. You can look on LinkedIn Learning about practicing your elevator pitch, that type of thing. And you can also make an appointment with an advisor in our Career Connections Center to do a mock interview. So logistics for a virtual interview: dress the same as you would for an in-person interview. Think of how you're going to look from the waist up. Download and test the platform ahead of time to be familiar with it. Test your connectivity and bandwidth. If you have issues in a specific room in your house that you don't normally use, you can get what's called an extender for, I think, about $20, that sort of thing. Find a quiet place, minimize distracting images behind you, consider the lighting, silence your phone and keep it out of sight. And you want to quit other programs to close tabs. You know how some people have little dings set if they get an email. So try to close out of any programs that might distract you. And if you run into trouble during the interview with some kind of technical issue, just try to keep cool, because again, it's kind of an audition. So you want to show that you can keep calm under pressure. For an in-person interview, try to eliminate all reasons for being late. Know your travel route, how long it takes to get there. Bring copies of your resume in case they need it. Bring a folder or organizer and a notebook and pen. And in virtual and in-person interviews, try to pay attention to how much you might be fidgeting and just try not to do it. You know, I had someone who was constantly tugging his shirt sleeves, and that didn't make me decide not to hire him, but it definitely was distracting. And also, before the interview, try to get a good night's sleep. Practice the tell me about yourself question, and just know that you're going to give it your best shot, and that's as much as you can do. So that's everything for preparing. Does anyone have any questions on preparing?
I do have a question.
Great.
Could you expand upon what you had mentioned earlier about things you'd want to research about the firm before you did your interview? I have a general sense, but I was curious if there were any common things that kept coming up.
Well, things to do to research would just be looking at their website, poking around their website, looking at different articles about the company online. So a Google search, where is the company mentioned in the news? What have they done in terms, are there trends? Are there specific products that they've done? Are there conferences that they've spotlighted? Things like that. You could look on their social media to see if, you know, they're spotlighting certain employees or certain products, things like that. Does that help a little bit more?
Yeah, okay.
And you can look on LinkedIn Learning as well. You know, nearly every company has some sort of presence on LinkedIn as a company. So you can also look on LinkedIn to see, you know, what types of things are they promoting. You know, especially if it's a company that has a product, they might have a Facebook presence, a LinkedIn Learning presence, and that sort of thing.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
I was just wondering how to first get the interview, especially as the world of employment is becoming more and more competitive and concentrated in large companies with a huge influx of applications. And also, how would your preparing method shift for smaller boutique companies where research opportunities are more limited?
Mm-hmm. Well, hopefully you've seen the entire program for Life After Clerk. We have specific workshops talking about the job search and networking strategies. So we really focus on how to look for jobs in those workshops. And this is really for once you've actually been solicited for an interview. But I can tell you too that we have lots of resources on our website. So lots of resources in terms of looking for a job. There's Handshake. On our resources page on our website, we actually have specific industry specific job boards. So visual and performing arts, you know, museums, things like that, hire culture, HIRE. So there are a lot of resources that are on our website. And so it's under Get Ready and then resources. If you prompt me at the end too, I'll give a quick run through too. Does that help at least for now, Rachel?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks. So how to form a strong first impression. So try to be on from the moment you log on to the interview or walk in the door. Smile as much as you can. It helps relax you. It helps make you look personable. Be prepared for small talk. So as people log on to interviews or as people come into a conference room, be prepared for small talk. Stay away from any sensitive topics, you know, like politics or anything like that. the weather's good. Talking about hobbies is good. Follow the other people's lead and just try to keep the conversation light and brief. And again, just try to take a lot of deep breaths, because basically everyone has been where you have been. So just know that at the outset. General tips for answering questions: try to keep answers between 30 seconds and 2 minutes. It's really difficult, I know, to wrap up the answer to a question. And that's why I really advocate to keep that library of interview questions, or answers to interview questions, because once you get used to practicing telling those stories, then you'll be more comfortable, and you'll also have an idea of how long it takes to tell that story of a particular issue of, how did you deal with a difficult colleague or something like that. And interviews should be conversations. Ask questions where appropriate. If someone kind of asks a rambling question and you didn't quite get it, you can ask them to repeat it. If they've really stumped you with a question, it's totally okay to just say, that's a great question. I've never heard it. I'd like to take a moment to think. That's totally fine too. If you're in doubt that you've answered the question in full, just say, does that fully answer your question? That shows eagerness. It shows active listening, that type of thing. Try not to get distracted in your own head, which I know is easy to do. I remember an interview very early on in my career where I was stumped with a question about what type of managerial style I liked. I had never heard of that question. And I remember that I rambled. I definitely rambled, and I blew that question and I didn't get a call back. So again, practice your stories. Never ever speak poorly of another employer, boss, or coworker. Again, seems like a no-brainer, but you would be surprised at what people have said to me in interviews. Think about growth mindset in your answers. So if they ask you about a specific software or a process, you don't want to say, I don't know that, and stop. You would say something like, I'm in the process of learning that software, or I know that I could learn that software. I have access to LinkedIn Learning. I've used a lot of YouTube tutorial videos. Anything that shows that you're willing to learn is a good answer. If they ask you specifics and you just don't know, don't say, I just don't know. You could say, I'm exploring options right now. If something was a terrible situation, you can talk about how it was challenging or humbling, but you learned from it. And don't ever say you're bored in a position. Say you're looking for something more challenging, because to me, anytime I heard any kind of discussion about that from an interview candidate, it just showed me that they weren't willing to take it to the next step if they were just bored in their job. You could say, I was looking for more challenges in the position, so I did this, or I found that, my company or my employer didn't really let me kind of color outside the lines and that sort of thing. So what you really want to nail to is the who are you question. When they say, tell me about yourself, why are you interested in this position? Vault has a really good 2-minute tutorial on that. What are you looking for? What kind of people do you like to work with? Think about what you want to say in that. What's important to you, and what do you want to relay? Because the employer is always thinking, can I trust you? How will you act on the job? What will it feel like to work with you? Do you have a strong work ethic? Will you be on time, dress professional every day, that sort of thing? So again, really practice your elevator pitch, practice talking about who you are. And you can do it in the privacy of your own room, in the car, or on a walk. Get used to telling that story and you'll feel more and more comfortable with it. The interview is also a great opportunity to practice, to show and demonstrate what you know about the company. And they might ask you, what do you know? And try to weave your questions in so that it shows that you did some research. You could say something like, yeah, I saw you participated in this conference. Can you tell me a little bit about that? What did you learn? Or I saw that your company won a specific award. What process led to that, or something like that. They'll ask you about your learning styles, and what they want to know is, are you a lifelong learner? Are you eager? Things that you can do is think about your star stories and remember that questions about challenges are hints of the kind of work environment you'll face. So show enthusiasm. Think about things like, have you ever had a difficult supervisor? That's a very common interview question. Difficult supervisor, difficult colleague, how you handled it. You might be asked things like, have you ever had to make an unpopular decision as a leader? That sort of thing. Another common question is, when working as part of a team, what kind of role do you fall into? And depending on the industry, there's really not a wrong answer. It may depend for specific jobs, but again, it just kind of talks about the kind of worker that you'll be. Are you the type of person who picks up the slack for other colleagues? Are you the type of person who, is the cheerleader? Are you the type of person who gets everyone organized? That sort of thing. And there are also questions about, will you fit in? How do you manage your time? They might ask you, tell me about a responsibility that you really enjoyed. And, make sure that you're always telling true stories. Make sure that you can talk about a weakness that you might have. And when asked to talk about a weakness, be prepared to name something kind of outside of the core skills the interview is looking for. It's a very tricky question, I'll admit. And again, it's okay to slow down and kind of think about the answers that you're giving people. If you're talking about a difficult situation at work, make sure that you never get too negative, because the interviewer will always assume that you might someday speak about that company. So again, try to really frame it as a learning opportunity and things like that. So once you've gotten through all of their questions, they'll give you an opportunity to ask your questions. So you should come prepared with 3 or 4 questions about the job or the company. And again, do your research, try to weave in proof that you did your research, and consider questions about company culture. And what I'm talking about here is, think about what is important to you in terms of the culture of the company. And it doesn't mean cultural fit, doesn't mean working with people who are like you. It can mean a lot of things, like do the company's core values match yours? Is that important to you? Is the culture at the company all about performance? Is that important to you? Or is that something you want to stay away from? Is the culture all about long hours, or is it about growth? You can look at different resources like Glassdoor. If you haven't heard of Glassdoor, it's literally glassdoor.com. It has lots of company reviews. And also they even have a section on what types of interview questions the company asks, which is helpful. So again, the bigger the company, the more information you'll find, but it's definitely a good resource. Is diversity important to the company? Is it important to you? You could ask a question like, what steps has the organization taken toward building a diverse work environment? Again, think about what's important to you and how you can frame questions to kind of get at that. And think too, in terms of company culture, what questions are they asking you? Because that kind of tells its own story as well. Do they ask questions about what makes you thrive? Do they ask questions like, what management style works for you? Do they ask questions like, how do you typically like to work? And again, it definitely varies by a person. Some people prefer phone calls, some people prefer email only, some people are super flexible, and everything in between. So think too about afterward, what questions did they ask you, and do you kind of get a good gut feeling about that, or is something kind of nagging at you? And think too about if you're interviewing and you meet with different people successively, it's okay to ask the same question of people because you'll always get a different answer, especially if you ask something like, can you tell me about the growth trajectory of your career here? It will give you clues about whether there is room for growth. Do they promote from within? And again, you'll get a different answer from each person, and that's okay. And that will tell you a lot. And it's okay to jot down notes in your interview because it's helpful to know who has asked what question. So for instance, when I interviewed at Clark, I interviewed with different members at the School of Management, but then also someone from ITS, the technological department. And I remembered things that he asked me, and I kind of jotted down those notes so that in the thank you, I then said, I remember you saying that this quality was really important in the position. I've demonstrated that in my career by doing X. So again, tiny quick notes will help you later with the thank you notes. So when someone asks about your weakness, what are they looking for? Could you elaborate on what would be a good way to answer this type of question? So again, it's a really tricky question because you want to be honest, you know, and you don't want it to seem like you're just trying to say what they want to hear. You know, an example of that is, you know, oh, I sometimes work too hard. So it's really tough. A weakness, you have to think about what your own weakness is. And again, you don't want to answer something that's within the core skill sets of it. You know, for instance, if it's a position where they really want you to stay on top of industry trends, say, I always find it hard to make time for newsletters or something like that, because you want to make time for that if your job is to stay on top of trends. So when you talk about your weakness, just try to frame it in the positive of saying, you know, in the past, I really struggled with learning a new platform. I tend to like to learn as I go, so I don't necessarily know quickly how to use a platform, but I've learned that that's my weakness and I know I need to work on it, that type of thing. Another question, does mentioning disabilities in the application hurt chances of getting an interview? No, I would say it doesn't. And often a lot of places might ask you that for equal employment opportunity tracking. So I'm talking about it in terms of that. And it's important to be honest and ask questions at whatever point you need to know. It's a very tricky issue, and we've actually done a specific workshop on that. So what I can do is find that, and when I send the PowerPoint to everyone, I can include that handout, because it's definitely something to think about if you want to talk about or address a disability. But there is there are lots of different ways of dealing with it, depending how forthright you want to be and how strict your needs are with a potential disability. So I will include information about that in the handout. A few more sample questions to ask here. So these are things that you can ask. And again, think about what wouldn't be important for you to find out. So different questions you could ask: what are the biggest challenges? What's your favorite part about working here? Again, that kind of gets into your own vetting of the company culture. And this last one I really like. Based on our conversation, so this is obviously toward the end of the interview, how do you feel my background and experience match the requirements for this position? Are there any gaps in my experience that concern you? Because this question is good for the thank you notes. Because again, if anyone answers the question and says, well, you know, I am concerned that you don't know Excel all that well, and this position, you have to work in Excel every day. That's a very simple example, but hopefully you get my meaning, because what you can do is then in your thank you note, address that perceived gap and basically just take that thank you note as an opportunity to convince them one more time that you can do that. So how to leave a strong final impression. Sincerely thank the interviewer or interviewers by name, and you can ask about the time frame for next steps if you don't know already. If you're in person, give a brief but sincere goodbye to everyone that you see on the way out. If you're in person, you can ask for business cards. Those are helpful for follow-up if you don't already have those things. Otherwise, you're really at the mercy of looking online to try to hunt down everyone's email address. If the interviewer makes small talk at the end, follow their lead, but don't draw it out for too long, because again, you want to end strong. For the thank yous, it's important to send a thank you email to every interviewer within 24 hours if possible, because you never know how quickly they might be making a decision. They might bring you in for an interview when they're 90% sure they're going to hire you, or when they're 50%, you don't really know, but you want to be prompt in your thank you, as prompt as possible. You can mention something specific that you enjoyed talking about in the interview. Thank you notes are hard. And I'll be the first to admit that, especially because what I tended to try to do is to tweak each thank you in case they compared notes. And again, I was trying to think about things that people had asked me in the interview and reference those things. It's your opportunity to emphasize what specifically interests you and excites you about the position, recap how you're a great fit, say you look forward to hearing from them, and you should format the email in the same way that you would a typed letter. It's okay to email it, of course, but make sure that it's very formal. Proofread your email. Is an email or handwritten thank you note better? I would say in the interest of time, everyone's doing emails these days. The thank you note, if you handwrite something, it really just takes too long. That said, if there's something specific about the industry or you want to do both, that's okay too. Follow your gut, but I would say email. It's better. So again, after you've done the interview, traumatic, however it may have been, written your thank yous, then take time to reflect. What questions stumped you and how can you improve the next time? Because again, it's not the end of the world if the interview doesn't go well, or if you didn't answer one question the way that you wanted to and it's kind of sticking in your craw and it bothers you. Just know that you've learned from it and that you'll answer the question better next time. Take some notes, because everything is a learning opportunity. Everyone's been where you have been. The Career Connections Center is here for you. We're here for mock interviews. We're here if you get the great news of an offer. We can help vet the offer for you. We are a resource. So please book an appointment with us if you want to talk about anything, if you want to practice an interview. We are here for you. Any tips on keeping calm? I would really say just know that it's a process. And it's funny because before I came to Clark, sorry, I keep referencing this, but it's fresh in my mind because it was a little over 2 years ago. It was really stressful because I was very anxious to just move on from my job. There were changes that I wasn't crazy about where I was already looking for a job, but then I learned of changes and I thought, I really want to move on. So I was stressed out, and a friend of mine told me, enjoy the process. And I thought, enjoy it? What would I enjoy about this? But looking back, I did learn a lot, and I met some really nice people, and it was a learning opportunity. So just take lots of deep breaths, know you're not alone, do your research, and just know that you've done the best you can. And it's really important to stay resilient. So also, if you need to just take a break, do that, because I personally found writing cover letters exhausting. And I remembered feeling so stressed out that I thought, I need to just take 2 or 3 days and not do any of this work for now. So I hear you. It's very challenging to stay resilient, but you can do it. Another question: when we decide to make a practice interview in your department at Clark, can you tailor it to a specific industry? I would say yes. And it's always good to, when you make an appointment, you can say what you're looking for. And in that, in the body of that field, you can indicate what specific field you're looking for. And keep in mind too, that Clark Connect is a resource. So for instance, in the chat, it says biotechnology. You can look for a Clark Connect alumni mentor, and they might be able to help you specifically for certain jobs, certain fields. So that's a resource as well. But again, giving a career advisor a heads up when you make the appointment, that's helpful. And then on Vault, I believe they even have, not for every industry, but take a look, because I know there was one on finance, for example, and they're expanding their library all the time. So you could even do searches on specifically, biotechnology interviews, that sort of thing. But as long as you give us a heads up, we are happy to do the research and be ready for you. Following up. So what you should do is, after the interview, wait 2 weeks or whatever time frame they gave you until that time has passed. You can call once or email once, and just once. Otherwise, you're going to seem like a pest. But when you contact them, don't say, did I get the job? You would say, I'm just reaching out to see how the process is going. Do you have any kind of update on hiring for X position? And just reiterate that you're really interested. It's not unusual for companies to take a long time. And unfortunately, sometimes it's not unusual for companies not to follow up with people who have come in for an interview. And that's not right at all. But it happens, I've heard. So it's okay to follow up just once and reiterate your interest. So next steps for you, now that you've gone through this workshop, is, create an inventory of your best star stories, pick some questions that are important to you, know that you have resources on Vault, LinkedIn Learning. You can make an appointment with us. You can follow us on all these socials.